I'd like to start with a quote from Howard Thurman. We heard it actually last week from Marcus. Howard Thurman says, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." In preparation for this particular sermon, Marcus made a request of me that I preach on something that breaks my heart. We did Joy Fest last month, so I'm preaching on something that breaks my heart this month. So I found something that broke my heart, and I was sitting with it. And I realized that as I sat with it for a couple weeks, actually, that what breaks my heart actually makes me come alive as well. That those two things are connected with one another. And the topic that I had thought of is this topic of mentoring and eldering, something which has both broken my heart at times and also brought me to life. So I think it's important for y'all to understand a little bit of my own journey through this, and I can tell some stories. And I'll start with a story when I was 16 years old. I was a precocious student, and as part of that, I was taking summer school between my 10th and 11th grade, taking U.S. history, so I wouldn't have to take the AP class. And I was taking it at a local community college in San Diego. And to be totally honest, I had been, a fairly successful student, but I didn't think too much of it. In my academic environment at the school that I was a part of, I was dime a dozen. There were plenty of smart kids getting good grades and studying hard. And I remember at this community college, I took the first midterm, and I aced it. And that wasn't anything too out of the ordinary for me, but it just was what it was. But I remember that in the context of this class, the professor sort of called me out a little bit and had mentioned to the class that I had done really well, and then she sort of had this moment where she said, wait a minute, how old are you? And I told her I was 16, and told the whole class I was 16, and everyone, wow. And she sort of just looked at me like, wow, that's really, really incredible that you're capable of this. And it was a moment for me of recognition. And it stuck with me my whole life. A moment of feeling like, oh, maybe I am something special. Maybe I do have something more to offer in that way. To be totally honest, I got a little addicted to that feeling, and I used to seek it out very regularly, sometimes in healthy ways, sometimes in unhealthy ways. But all to say that I've been very engaged with it. And I'll bring in another thing, which is that my work with a men's group, Illumine, which Glenn Siegel, those words for our blessing are from that group. And not to get into the weeds too much with it, but what's important to understand is that where Illumine is as an organization is essentially a group of men who are trying to figure out how to become a network of elders. That is the work that we're engaged in at the moment. So I raise all this to say that eldering is something that's very important to me. Mentoring is something that's very important to me. And I've thought a lot about it. I've been with it a lot. And as I've kind of done my own work with it and what I was really looking for from elders or mentors for me, this notion came to me, this idea that what I needed from them was that I wanted them to speak for me before I could speak for myself. Or another way to say it is, I needed them to see things in me that I could not see in myself. And through their seeing, it allowed me to see it on my own. So much as that professor was able to just give some recognition to me, it helped me understand better about who I am and how I'm operating in this world. So before I go on, I want us to all just stop. And I'll invite you all now to close your eyes, me and the folks at home, and to think of a person that helped you see something in yourself before you could see it. Or alternatively, someone who was able to speak something that you needed to hear or say before you were able to speak it yourself. Let us take a moment of gratitude for those relationships. Well, I'm happy to be joining you today, of all days, for MLK Sunday. MLK has so many beautiful lessons, things we could go, areas we could go, but what I want to talk about today is about one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, one of his elders and one of his mentors, Howard Thurman, who we heard the quote from earlier. And I just want to give a quick little biography of Howard Thurman for those who aren't familiar with him. He is really an exceptional figure. He's an African American man. He was born in 1899 in Florida. And he was, from a young age, he was a nature mystic. He talks about his great friend, this being an oak tree that he used to sit and talk to all day when he was a young boy, understandably. He was very precocious, but you can imagine there weren't a ton of academic opportunities for a young African American at that time. So he had to excel, and he was a valedictorian. He eventually got a scholarship to go and study at Morehouse College, where he was also the valedictorian, went on to seminary, became a theologian. So he was an academic, a theologian, a mystic, and he did some really just incredible things throughout his time. Just a few things that I'll highlight. In the 40s, he was invited to San Francisco to co-pastor a church with a white minister, and they started the first intentionally interracial, intercultural house of worship in the United States. And he also, earlier than that, he had been invited to India as an emissary of Christianity, where there he learned the power of nonviolent civil action from the Indians. He actually met with Gandhi himself. And he's widely credited with bringing that nonviolent action into the civil rights movement here in America. That was not something that was endemic to the civil rights movement. He is credited with bringing that in. He studied with Martin Luther King Sr. They were contemporaries, and he mentored Martin Luther King Jr. when he was the dean of Marshall Chapel at Boston University. Again, having an African-American dean of a predominantly white university was a big deal. So basically, to put all this together, this guy was like a UU before UU, right? Mystic, academic, theologian, dedicated to all these various principles that are very much in line with our principles today. So he's a very inspiring figure. And he was also a very capable mentor, an elder to Martin Luther King. So I want to tell a few stories, not only from his own life, but from his relationship with Martin Luther King, that illustrate some of what I'm talking about here about what it means to elder on some level in this attentional way. So the first story I want to tell is about Howard Thurman himself. And for those that are interested, there's a movie you can go watch called Backs Against the Wall. It's on YouTube. It's free. I highly, highly recommend it. Many of the stories you're going to hear today are from there. When Howard Thurman arrived at school at Morehouse College, he sat down in a big hall with all the other new students, and the president of the school got up, and he addressed the students. He said, "Young gentlemen, young gentlemen." Those two words, it was all it took. Howard Thurman talks about when he heard those two words, it was like iron being poured into his spine. He was recognized. And this president of the school was helping him see what he could not see for himself already, which is that he was a gentleman as well, even though he was living in a society which was telling him the opposite of that at every turn. It says that he went on to read every book in the Morehouse Library and graduated as valedictorian. So you can see that the recognition really made a big impact there. The next part I want to talk about, or next story I want to talk about, is about his work as an author. Perhaps his most famous work is a book called Jesus and the Disinherited. Not sure if anyone here has heard of it. But this book was very, very instrumental in the civil rights movement. And essentially what it did was it reframed Christianity and the story about Jesus away from the sort of Christian, like imperial white Jesus who was Lord and King and powerful, to the oppressed Jesus, the Jesus that was born in a manger, that's an immigrant, that was marginalized. And this reforming of an old story allowed so many in the civil rights movement to understand how the story of Jesus was their story as well. It was a story of being the oppressed, not the oppressor. It's said that Martin Luther King walked around with a copy of Jesus and the Disinherited in his back pocket at all times, and that he studied it very carefully during the Montgomery bus boycott. So again, we have this example where Howard Thurman was able to show these African American leaders something that they had not seen previously, but from what I can estimate was sorely needed, greatly needed, and allowed them to rise up into those positions that they did, empowered as they were, iron in the spine, right? I'll tell one more story about Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King, which was Martin Luther King actually had an attempt on his life before the one that was successful. He got stabbed with a letter opener. And while he was in the hospital recovering from that, Howard Thurman came to visit him. And I was really struck by what Howard Thurman said to him and how he advised him. He didn't tell him what to do, necessarily. What he said to do was, he advised him to retreat into silence. Retreat into silence and listen for what is his to do. He didn't tell Martin Luther King, go do X and go do Y, and this will solve that. He didn't have answers for Martin Luther King Jr. and where he was. But he was concerned for Martin Luther King's spiritual health and mental health. How is he going to continue after this event? And his invitation in all of that was to have Martin Luther King look inside to find out what is his to do and listen to that, listen in that silence for that. I'll tell a personal story here about this silence. I've been thinking of Howard Thurman a lot in preparation for this, and I've been finding myself in a bit of a restless time within my own life. A lot of life decisions, many things moving. I think many of us are in this place as we're trying to adjust COVID and life transitions. So I decided to go out into nature on Friday. This was just this past Friday. And just listen. Just listen, as he had said. And I guess I was feeling a little bit lonely in all that listening, and so I called out to Howard Thurman and asked him if he might join me for a little while out on this walk in the woods. We were out in Nevada at the Big Trees Trail. And he graciously joined me, which I was so grateful for. And as he showed up to me, he showed up with a very simple, direct, loving message. He just said to me, silence. Silence. And I knew what he meant. He meant just calm down. Just calm down. So I was trying to, on my walk, I was trying to just listen, but my mind chatter just kept going, kept going. Finally, I'd settle down. Then the chatter would come back. And I said, I'm just so restless. And he said, of course you are. Of course you're restless. You're distracting and drawing yourself away from the deep, eternal silence that calls to you from within. Whoa, geez. Bam, that one really hit me. It was a big one. But I think that ultimately was the same message he was giving to Martin Luther King, and I think it's one that we can all use sometimes. That when we find ourselves in those harried moments of going around, we can return back to the silence and listen. Listen for what's there. Perhaps it may show us what is ours to do. So I kind of want to wrap some of this up a little bit with another story. I've been, like I said, making some, transitions, life decisions, and I was speaking to one of my spiritual directors about it and saying that I was afraid that one of my mentors may not understand one of these decisions, and I just was having some feelings about that, feeling some guilt. And what he said to me was, Joe, I think what you're looking for is compassion. I think what you're looking for is compassion. And he was right. What I was looking for was whenever I was going to tell this mentor of mine about my decision, I wanted him to receive me with compassion and hold that. And I just keep coming back to that word when I think about what it means here to elder. This idea of compassion. And I kind of realized too that this is the part that can break my heart. When I don't get that compassion from the elders in my life, the mentors in my life, or even just the world at large. I'm looking for that compassion. It can break my heart. But when I do receive that compassion, it brings me to life. It helps me feel stronger in my path, like there's iron in my spine. Knowing that I was able to receive the recognition of those elders, and have that be okay. Right where I am. So I'd like to end now with just another very simple time. So I'll invite you again to close your eyes. I want you to hold someone in your heart that showed you compassion in your life. Elder or no. And I invite you to really sink into that compassion. Does it bring you alive? It brings me alive. And like I said, it breaks my heart to hear of stories where this compassion is not extended and the disconnect and discord that can follow. So I invite you now to, with this feeling of compassion in this person, to be with this compassion beyond our time together. Take it out into coffee hour. Bring this person with you out there. Bring it out into the rest of your Sunday. Bring it out into the next time you have a difficult conversation with somebody. To hold that compassion within you. And my prayer is that as you do that, it will bring you to life. May it be so.